What's Your Work Fit is sponsored by Hudson Davis. Start your brand's marketing and communications journey today at hudsondaviscommunications.com. I'm Dan Smolin. I built a successful executive career in marketing and communications before becoming a top headhunter and founding my own executive search firm. Now get this, every day, mainstream media runs stories in which old school bosses and thought leaders frame your work and workplace issues in ways that are often divisive and unmeaningful. And that's just crazy. The time has come for you to answer the question, what's your work fit? So that your work and career fit who you are, how you want to live, and what you want your lasting contributions to be. What's your work fit? It answers your questions and tackles the issues that keep you up at night about advancing your career in this time of workplace revolution. So let's get started. Hey, good day everyone. Dan Smolin here from What's Your Work Fit. I hope you're having a good and successful day, and we're going to make it even better right now. We got a great show ahead. I just wanted to say a few things about What's Your Work Fit, and I want to start with gratitude. We are finishing up our first year of What's Your Work Fit, and what a crazy journey it's been. We started kind of ugly, and along the way, we built a show that looks like TV, is fun to watch, but most importantly, does what I always intended it to do, to help people to find and do work that's wonderful and is also a wonderful part of the day, doing other wonderful things, and as I've often said, not the all-consuming time suck of a day. That's a work fit, and a beautiful one. And I'm so pleased to have an audience that appreciates what we're doing, and it's growing. And oh, by the way, if you saw last week's live show, we did What's Your Work Fit in the Workplace? And for that series, we have co-hosts Mark Gilbreth of Liquid Space and Francis Saley, who's an expert on commercial real estate and how the workplace is evolving. He's prolific on LinkedIn. So my two co-hosts and I are going to be dealing with really ripped from the headlines topics about the workplace, what it means to gather, what is venuing, sort of a made-up term, but we're running with it, which is to say, instead of saying, I've got a project, let's meet, it's taking a few steps back and saying, what are the rules that we want to establish for ourselves so everybody on the team feels included, feels vital, and most importantly, isn't stuck in traffic all day when they don't have to be. These are among the discussions we're going to have with probably the world's top thinkers in future of work and workspace coming throughout the following year. So join us on this crazy ride. I promise you it's going to be worth every minute of it. Okay, let's get to it. I want to introduce you all to my dear friend and returning guest, Briar Dougherty. Welcome, Briar. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. We had so much fun back in January when you came in, and we were talking about resumes, which to a former recruiter like me was sort of the bread and butter of recruitment. You had to start with really a mission statement, if you will, and the resume is taking on new importance, especially in the future of work opportunities that are presenting themselves right now. I want to tell everybody a little bit about Briar if you haven't met her before. She is the CEO and founder of let me try that again. She is the CEO and founder of Career Organic, which helps scores of professionals with career coaching, strategy development, and resume writing.
That's right.
You're having quite a year yourself, aren't you?
Very much, very much. A lot has been changing in the market. So we have been really busy trying to stay ahead for our clients and our community.
And we'll point listeners and viewers to your social media at the end of the show, but do make a point of checking out Career Organic, because the work that Briar and her team are doing is really cutting edge. Okay, I want to get to this week's question. This is a really good one, and it was submitted by one of our younger viewers whose name is Riley. Hey, Riley. Riley is a knowledge worker at a tech company. She loves the everyday, a new challenge to overcome vibe of her workplace. And Riley's hyper focused on her deliverables. She tries her best to be a good team member, and her higher ups just increased her salary. Good on you, Riley. But here's the rub. There's always a rub, right? Riley is so passionate about the work that she says she forgets to step away every once in a while. Milestones in her life slip. She doesn't take a summer vacation like she hoped she would. And because of all of it, it's really fear of missing out, FOMO. And it wasn't until one of her parents said to her, really called her on it and said, you got to hit the pause button. So it is no longer if she should take a pause. Now Riley asks you, Briar Dougherty, when should I take a pause at work?
It is such a great question. And I kind of want to take a step back real quick, because
Sure.
I want to resonate with Riley's story, and kind of share that. Is I actually just put out a blog about when I was in college, and I worked full time and I went to college full time. So it's kind of double dipping. And I was a general manager for a New York City health and fitness club. So I was 20, going through all of that, right? So I was constantly fearing I was going to miss something at work. I was going to miss an opportunity to get promoted, or to, have some other responsibility given to me, or even a raise or performance review. I wanted everything to be positive. And I completely overinvested, and I passed out on a New York City train,
Wow.
on a subway, going to an all hands meeting for the organization. And I had not rested that week. I had, finals, things going on in college life, but then was trying to show up for work at 120%, and literally was laid out in a subway in New York City, going to 14th Street Station. And it ended well, because a lot of my community around me, helped pick me up. An elderly woman let me sit down in her seat. Someone got me an unopened water bottle. And it was the time that I said, I have to pause. I have to reprioritize. And so Riley's story, is very personal to me. And so I do want to say, before we begin today, I've gone through all these struggles. So I don't just teach it from a book I've read. I've experienced it, and I've gone through the very lows, and come out the other side, learning how to set boundaries, learning how to hear myself and my inner dialogue and actually action on it. So I wanted to say that first before we kind of kick this off.
So let's kick it off.
Okay. So the when is an issue that I hear a lot. Is, when do I know when to press pause? And I want to say, pause for a lot of people is different, right? So I think about pause in multiple ways, especially when it comes to career. One is pausing in the moment. So a manager asking you to do a new project and you immediately saying yes, versus taking that moment to pause, to evaluate your current workload, to understand, can you contribute at 100% if you're taking this on, or does something need to fall off in order for you to accept it? A lot of people just don't give themselves the space to make that decision, right? So that's pausing in the moment first. So that would be one where, if Riley is going through this and she's fearing not being productive enough, being an evaluator of your workload, and are you able to actually keep your 40 hours or whatever you're paid for, and get that work done, plus take more. So pausing in the moment. Then there's pausing in say taking a few days off. So we're talking about a vacation here, right? So we're talking about maybe a week, might be 10 days. And so when are we allowed to take that pause in our career and step away for even a long weekend? And I actually
Mhm.
hear this from a lot of people where no one wants to take a week because they're coming back to this massive workload. And it's like the big question is, why did I take that time off?
Exactly.
Right? So
Mhm.
so being able to pause in short bursts, I often think about it this way. If that is really a stressor for you, coming back after a full week or 10 days taking off, try pausing on short term. So take a Friday, Monday off, take a Thursday, Friday with the weekend off. And again, if we're talking about a knowledge worker, then I would assume that it's a Monday through Friday role.
Right.
Okay. If it's a weekend role, or say you're an RN and you have, 2 days on and all of that, it's going to differ for you. So
Right.
I want to speak to that I'm talking about a 9 to 5, roughly Monday through Friday role. Taking that Thursday, Friday off could often recharge you, right? So when we
Mhm.
talk about when, there's a few things that we should be evaluating for ourselves. One, how are we feeling emotionally and mentally, right? Can we pursue this? Can we actually come at 100% and give our all? If we can answer that, yes, like I still have your more mojo and I can take this on and I'm excited for that, then that might not be the trigger to pause, right?
Mhm.
But when we're evaluating and the immediate response in your head and your heart says, whoa, like I'm stressed or I feel anxious, or let me, take a moment and drink a glass of water and I can do some Red Bull this week and get this done, right? When those things, we have to recognize we have triggers that are telling us to pause. So I would ask Riley, what is that trigger? What's coming up when people are asking you to take on more? When you're thinking about taking a vacation, what is the response? What is the fear? Because if we
Mhm.
don't understand that, we can't take any step forward. Does that make sense?
Yes, Riley is a poster child, if you will, for a lot of young people in the workplace. When I mean young, I mean new to the workplace. They've perhaps just graduated from a college or a certificate program. This is their first major, solid workplace experience. And because growing up, they were always told to please and to overachieve, the last thing they're going to do is hit that pause button.
Right.
And so what you're speaking to is probably one of the first external stressors that they're feeling, which is to say, why am I doing this? It
Yeah.
doesn't make me feel good. And it's not necessarily providing a positive delta, meaning I'm probably taking on too much and my work product's going to suffer.
Right. And so when we ignore those signs, and
Hmm.
and that's why I told my story in the beginning,
Right.
right? I ignored those signs. I mean, I ignored so much so that my body was completely depleted and seized. Like I completely collapsed and had, I was convulsing on a train, right? So I want to share that because that's like the extreme, right? That is exhaustion, complete and utter exhaustion. And I had those red flags. I had the,
Mm.
but I have a term paper coming up, or I have, I agreed to this extra shift and now I don't get to go home for Thanksgiving and I'm not going to be able to rest that weekend, right? So like all of these things are happening emotionally and mentally to me. But physically, and this is why I emphasize that emotionally and mentally, we're very quick to dismiss that. But
Right.
if we're physically injured, it's like if you sprain your ankle, you're not going to run the marathon, right? You're going to rest on the sideline, or you're going to do something, you're going to get a pair of crutches and maybe walk for a mile, okay? But you're going to make adjustments to what you can and cannot do based on that physical injury. And so when we think about our mental and emotional state and relate that to your physical state, because you have a physiological response to stress,
Right.
right? It slows you down. It makes decision making harder. It has physical effects on your emotions and your mental capacity. So when we pay attention to that and we equate it to the same value or weight that we put on our physical selves, we're going to do better in our career, right? Because when we're overtaxed, and I tell my entire staff this, like everybody, like I had someone this week, her daughter has a fever and she's been trying to struggle with naps and trying to like, not getting sleep at night. And she was very straightforward with me, like, this is what's going on. And I said, okay, like, let's adjust your deliverables for the week, because I understood I'd rather get 100% from her and her be at 100%, because one, the tenure is going to be longer, right? So she's going to stay because she's fulfilled.
Right.
But at the same time, she's going to be highly productive and on, if I give her that space to have for herself. Now, the comment that I'm sure is going to pop up is, well, what if my boss doesn't do that? What if my boss isn't as intentional, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we often fail to set our own boundaries and expectations to be able to take a pause. So when I said the pause in the moment, right? When someone says, hey, can you take on this extra client? Can you take on this extra account? If you don't pause and look at what your bandwidth looks like, you can't come back with a response. So that response might be, well, I can. However, I would have to hand off this to someone else in order to put my full energy into this new account.
Right. Right.
So you give yourself the ability to have really strategic conversations. And if you start that early in your career, that just amplifies. You grow and learn from all of those interactions with bad bosses and good bosses. And it really does help kind of create that catalyst for growth.
Right. I want to get to some comments here.
Yeah.
Our first one comes from Amsterdam. I'm so pleased by this. David Marks writes, I seriously regret not going to a wedding in Tokyo due to work pressure. I cannot remember when I felt what that work was so important at the time, meaning that it was really not important after all, I think is the point he's trying to make here. It just kind of breaks your heart. I mean, here he's got some friends and he couldn't share their joy. He couldn't go to Tokyo and share their joy. And as a young person, I would imagine that's got to be a cold splash of water in the face when suddenly you don't get to see your sorority sister get married, or your best friend from summer camp get sworn into the bar, or, a kid's birthday party, because you felt it was too important to hit the pause switch.
Well, I want to bring up a case in point. Recently, working with someone who was expecting the birth of a grandchild.
Yeah.
And he was being called into an interview. And it was lovely because he stood up for that boundary and said, yeah, I would love to set up a new interview. However, I'm expecting to welcome a grandchild in the next week. So I'd like to push that date. And that's such a prime example. That is exactly how you own your own space, but you pause to be able to create that dialogue and be intentional and strategic in that. And so the employer absolutely was like, oh, like, congratulations. It created dialogue and personal, like, human to human interaction. And I think a lot of people forget that that's on the table. It's more, if your boss is not personal with you, it does not mean they don't want to be, or that they're not open to those types of conversation. It's that the workplace and lawsuits and all of the legalities behind work now have created this stoicism in leadership.
Right.
And so we can't be afraid of what is on the exterior of our bosses. We need to own that we have limitations, that we're allowed to pause, that we're allowed to take our PTO, and that it makes us a much more valuable contributor to the organization and the team when we're coming at 100%.
I want to share something with the audience that they don't know or may not remember if they didn't see the first episode with Briar. And that is that one point in her life, she was an elite athlete, a star athlete at the collegiate level until she wasn't. And she just said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I have to imagine when you were playing basketball, all these old sports metaphors started ringing in your ear, play hurt, don't leave anything on the court. And gosh, a lot of people in senior management, they also had varsity sports experience, and they seem to find resonance in those old sports metaphors, which I got to tell you, they're kind of awful.
Yeah.
Because they reinforce the human body, and you proved it on that subway train. You had an autonomic event. You suffered syncope. You literally fell down, collapsed, lost consciousness, and convulsed.
Yep.
How is that good for a workplace? That's a negative ROI. And sure, you may recover from it, but you may still have the stressor of it. Or you might say, screw it, I'm out of here. No mas, going to another job.
Right. Well, and a lot of people will leave their job thinking they don't like the work. But it's often the environment that they're running away from.
That's right.
And so like when I do work with clients and career coaching and trying to navigate these transitions, the first question I ask is, if you didn't have your boss or your environment right now and you were set up for success, would you still enjoy coming to work each day? Right. And so if you can answer, well, yes, of course, like I love working with clients, or I love sales, or I, love coding, whatever it might be. If you can answer that, then you understand that it's time to make a move, right? So it's in the employer, it's the environment. It might even just be your boss, because one bad boss can kill an entire culture for a team, a department, a business unit in an organization.
That's right.
And so I often even coach to don't look at culture online, right? So, because I work with a lot of different clients at different companies, and I know the behind the scenes often, where on the surface, like on their website and their community initiatives, it sounds amazing. But that one bad boss, if you don't interview against that, or you don't see those red flags, you become the person who's scared to take a pause because you feel pressured, which is exactly what that comment said, is you feel pressured in order to continue to perform. And yes, to the sports analogies, you keep pushing through. Like I remember I played varsity when I was a starting varsity player as a freshman. I literally remember my third practice, and it was our point. She went up for a layup, came down, tore her ACL. Okay. She tried to keep practicing. And when I tell you her recovery was like, I still remember it today. It was awful. It was awful. But like, that is the mentality, is I'm just going to do it. I actually did that where I was I have some really fun stories here today of being, hurt, but I was in a car accident where someone went around another car and like sideswiped me. And so I had whiplash on the sides of my neck because my neck hit the window and back that way. We had a huge game the next day. Huge game. It was one of our biggest rivals. The person that I guard, because I was a huge defensive player, she was going to be playing D1 basketball. So I mean, like, she was.
That's impressive.
Awesome. Great player, but I always played either the quickest or the biggest, right? That was where I was kind of selected to play. And because I was scrappy and I could jump and I could box out. So I was like a house when it came to defense. Well, the coach asked me, like, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to play? Do you not? And I played. I had one of the best games of my season. But the after effect of that, I mean, I was sore, I was laid out, and I'm lucky I didn't get injured further, right? And so athletes absolutely, I think, have that, and even our military, when we have military transitions and you separate from active duty to the civilian roles, there is this am I allowed to mentality. Like, am I allowed to take that day off? Am I allowed to pause? And so there's a lot of pieces of this pie where how do you create a framework to follow? Right. And I
Right.
think that's the question that Riley's really asking
Yeah.
is how do I discern, right? Like, how do I say this is the formula and this is when I enact the formula?
Right.
And so, like, going back into that, I would absolutely say you have to find your triggers first. So when things come to you and you flare up, your body tenses up, you're going to feel it. You're absolutely going to feel it. You have to pay attention. Like, mark that down, write it down in a little journal, make a note on your calendar. Like, this is what happened. And as you see the progression, because not everyone's a coach, not everybody does psychology and all of that fun stuff. Okay. When you see the pattern, you're then going to be able to say, okay, it's when they try and add an initial project, or it's when they try and flex me past my work hours, or when I have my child's baseball game and I'm not able to go. Now we get to see what are the boundaries that are being crossed, and we can work toward that to create those pauses and to create that space for ourselves.
So I want to get to the why of all of this, which is you'd be surprised how many people aren't aware of some of these telltale signs you need to pause. And these are some things that I gathered from entrepreneur.com and the Indeed website. We'll tick through them, be like a Dave Letterman top 10
I like
list.
the last one.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Too hyper focused on work. And I think what happens then is, adrenaline will only take you so far, and then it will make you crazy. If you've ever been up for more than one day at a time, you speak nonsense and people think you're cuckoo.
Yeah.
So the hyper focus, that's a telltale sign. Number 2 is slower thought processing. And I will add to that diminished executive function. Executive function is like, how do I do stuff? And when you can't figure out how to transfer a phone call, and I've had that experience where all of a sudden, why don't I remember how to do this? That can come from not having enough pause in your life.
Yep.
Number 3 is miscues. When you're really stressed out because you haven't taken a pause, you may not have picked up on a little sub-narrative that's happening in a strategic meeting that you're having on your team. And what the person was really saying was this, and you completely missed it.
Yeah.
That's another big one. We talked about canceled non-work activities. I mean, how many people have canceled hair appointments? I talked about this on another episode where the hairstylist was getting ready to fire the client because they've canceled already 2 times, and then 3 strikes, they're out, right? The next one is a psychological term, dissociation, which that one's pretty scary. That's when you're sort of in la la land. And dissociation is a trigger mechanism in the brain that deals with very high stressors and traumas. Yep. So if you get to a point of dissociation, you're like, what?
Well, it's also like compartmentalization. So like if you're over compartmentalizing,
right,
that's also a part of dissociation. So like if you have to keep your things in buckets all the time, and I will say our male friends are more apt to do this than our female friends because we're a bit more fluid emotionally. If you start to overdo those buckets, that's also just kind of like so people understand that term as well.
Yeah, and what you don't realize is because your brain is preventing you from panicking, is that all the people around you think there is something terribly wrong here. So if you get to a point of dissociation, hopefully somebody's going to say to you, dude, come over here. I want to talk to you. Becoming resentful. This one was, I shouldn't have been surprised by it. But again, this is a stressor response where everything becomes a threat. And you're resentful of your boss because they got to take a day off. Or you're resentful of a coworker because they had the gumption to say, you know what? I need to get my nails done. I need to go get my hair done.
Yeah.
Avoiding people. Oh my God. If you're a normally positive, extroverted or ambiverted type person, and you start avoiding people, well, not only is that a sign of depression, but that is also a precursor to, dude, you got to pause. And the
Hmm.
one that you love the most is you show up looking like a Walking Dead cast member. You know, that's a bit cheeky, but I've seen people show up to work looking like a mugshot,
Hmm.
and it may be in many cases that they've been going on the dial's been turned up to 11 too long,
Yeah.
and they don't know how to dial it back. And more importantly, get intentional about their own time and their own value and say to their boss, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I've got this thing coming up. It's my 20th college reunion. I I just don't want to have the weekend. I miss these people. They are the core of my life. They're my rocks. I need to go take time off. I promise you, I'm going to have everything covered. I've got redundancies. And when I get back on Tuesday the following week, we're going to be rocking and rolling.
And I think part of, because like adding this to the list, because it's a really simple thing,
Mm-hmm.
is apologizing a lot, right?
Yes.
So when you start apologizing for things that are necessity for you, so, oh, I'm sorry, I have to go to the bathroom. I'm just going to take 10 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to pack my lunch today, so I'm going to run to the vending machine and I'll be back in a moment. When you start over apologizing, something's off, right? So you're feeling some sort of guilt response to the workload. You're feeling some inadequacy with where you are in work, and so that can often create a negative talk cycle in your brain, right?
Right.
Because then you start to assume, and this is where the becoming resentful comes from, where you assume everybody else is working like you. And so when you see someone else not doing that, it's, well, why am I apologizing and running to the vending machine, and they get to go out to Chipotle for lunch for an hour,
Right.
right? And so the apology piece I see most often become the start of it.
Well, if you live and work in Canada, that's so culturally embedded. I'm sorry. I hear it all the time from my
Yeah.
listeners in Canada. Uh, I'm sorry I missed your podcast, and I'm like, dude, it's okay.
Yeah.
You have things
But
to do.
that's the prioritization piece, right? Because like, where is it coming from? It's you're feeling like your priorities should be fully at work.
Right.
And I wrote a post recently about this because I had a friend pass away
Oh, I
last
know.
week.
I saw that, and I'm so
And
deeply sorry for your loss.
I appreciate that. And this is a colleague that I loved dearly, and we've
Mm,
stayed in touch for a really long time. But I was her boss when we
yeah.
got together. And so I was like in my 20s, she's in her late 50s. And so we had this really cool dynamic. But, I found out late at night and I had to go to work the next day. And I kind of just took it slow. I was still processing my emotions. I was still kind of going through, what it meant to be saying goodbye the way that I had to say goodbye to her. And
Oh,
it was really important for me to own, even 15 minutes that morning with my coffee and like not sign on exactly when people were expecting me and just say, hey, I'm going to be a little late.
right.
And so even in those moments, your emotional capacity is not like your value at work, right? So you can go through those things. You can be vulnerable. You can be sad. You can be, exhausted. You just need to be able to communicate that.
You bring up a point, and it harkens back to my first job out of college when I was working for a trade association in Washington D.C. And one of our admins lost her dad. He died suddenly, and I really wanted to go to the funeral. Well, my boss caught hold of the fact that Debbie's dad had died suddenly, and he said, "We are all going. We are all going." Now, it
Wow.
wasn't a huge department. There were a dozen
Yeah.
of us, and we had deadlines. We were an editorial team. But that meant so much to Debbie because it was like, wow, you paused to honor the life of my dad. I can't
That's
tell you how much that
powerful.
means to me, right? I wish
Incredibly
I
powerful.
wish we could see more of that in the workplace. I want to. We're having such a great conversation. We've got a lot of comments. I just want to kind of
Yeah.
zing through them. Nina, who we got every. It's so funny. So many people are in Europe today. Nina's still in Switzerland. Taking a pause can be difficult and uncomfortable at times, especially the beginning of one's career. We just talked about that.
Yeah.
But my boss Joe, he modeled really good behavior. And if you've got a young team and something like that happens on your team, do take the opportunity to shut the office down for the afternoon so that you can attend the funeral or the burial or the shiva call or the wake or whatever it might be, because that is so meaningful.
Well, and it's also when you're thinking about young career, right? So just starting out, there is this thought that I have to overperform, right? And I kind of just want to give a tidbit. So if you're starting a new job and this goes at any point in your career, but if you are starting a new job and you're kind of new to the market or you're new to the employment in general or paid work, setting up a 30, 60, 90-day
Mm,
kind of strategy with your boss gets you on the right footing. And having that initial meeting, and I always reference this, is that if you start a new job, you want to get a meeting with your supervisor on the books within the first 2 weeks of starting.
hmm
And so, like within the first couple of days, you ask for this meeting and you get it booked on a calendar. Okay.
hmm
And you bring the agenda. And the biggest piece of that agenda is one, understanding that within the first 3 months, of you onboarding and learning the proprietary, systems and
hmm
processes, what would be the biggest thing that you could do to contribute to either take something off of their plate or to help the team create something that's going to create traction for the organization? What is that one thing? And if you start that conversation and really get to them, you're automatically setting expectations. So if they tell you, oh, well, that project, um, as we said, you're a UX researcher on the team and we're trying to get this
Yeah.
website launched by the end of the year, having those reports within that first 90 days filled out and going off to our UX designers, that would be integral to this project. You now can actually reverse engineer each week of what you need to be working on, and you can provide status to your supervisor. And what this does is means the first couple of weeks or the first month that you're there, you're not overextending yourself.
Right.
You have a plan, you have a strategy, and you know the expectation. It's not ambiguous. And a lot of us get in trouble when we don't get expectations explicitly spoken or written to us.
Right.
We go on assumption, and that often leads to overworking and not setting boundaries and not being okay taking a pause or a day off.
I want to make a quick point about that, and then I need to get to a couple other comments. The beauty of the 30, 60, 90 day is that for a hired talent coming on job, it's their opportunity to say, I'm establishing my competency. Here are the milestones along the way. If you and to the talent, I would say this is your opportunity to pay forward, and it gives you agency to do the ask for a pause
That's right.
later on. Okay, I want to get to Jackie's comment. This is one of my dearest, oldest friends, and you're not old, lady. How come? So she came back from a forced layoff because of a needed pause due to burnout. She loved her clients, ultimately couldn't stand the employer, but as an older worker, no, you are not old. It's now tough to pursue any job that doesn't check all the boxes. And she was like raising her hand saying, thoughts?
Yep. So there's a couple of things there. One is checking all the boxes. The things that I look for are on both sides of the coin.
Mm-hmm.
So are we going to have work attributes that are going to be fulfilling for us, that we're going to be a high level contributor?
Right.
And do we have an environment that we can sustain and grow in? Right. And so a lot of the boxes are not going to be in the job description. So it comes down to interviewing versus the job description. So applications, I tell everyone at any age and at any phase in their career, because I actually work with a lot of people that retire and then they come back. So that's an interesting dynamic as well. But the boxes start with work attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're looking at a role and there's 10 attributes on there, do you like at least half of that?
Right.
Right. And I say like. And then the second half is, if you don't like it, is it going to be a non negotiable for you?
Hmm.
And so it doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. I know that everybody's like, what? I'm a huge fan of interviewing and working through those nuances, because as an employer myself, I've been a hiring manager for over 20 years now. Okay. And so I know I've had really great candidates come to my table and bring different things that I had not considered for that role. And I've revamped the role. And I had a client who made a transition. She's South African. She was working in Switzerland, and I was working with her when she was in Switzerland, and she was looking at a job in Denmark. And so the company had to sponsor her, had to do the relocation, do all of that. And she came in at a junior level compared to everybody else interviewing for that role.
Right.
And during the interview process, she swooned them so much that they opened a new role for her. She didn't get the job she was applying to, but they relocated her. She worked for them for 2 years, and now she is like killing it in a South African job now, and she's moved all over the place. But she creates these opportunities because she doesn't just stop at the job description. She doesn't just stop at the reviews on Glassdoor about culture. So I would push you to get refined in the interview process so that you can see those red flags and those opportunities.
Yeah, I'm going to add another thing. Jackie, shame on you. You are not old and you are a dazzler. Jackie Young is an experiential marketer who's absolutely brilliant. And I think she would be a joy to join anybody's work team that is involved in experiential marketing, because she blows my mind with her creativity. Her ideas are fantastic. So enough on my soapbox. We got time for one more comment, and then we got to get to what's your work fit. Phil White said the other day, I discovered something called action bias. I'd never heard this term before. As the name suggests, it's the propensity to do something, anything. And he's asking, I'm wondering how many of us default to that. He says, I know I do. What are your thoughts?
I would agree. But your bias always comes, no matter what type of bias,
Yeah.
it always comes from your learned experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And your environment. So depending on, so like if you're apologetic, right? So your first response to things is to say sorry, okay? That's learned. That came from somewhere.
Yeah.
And so we don't have time to go through the psychology of unlearning that, but we can first take the step of recognizing it. So, and that's what I was talking about with triggers, is if you start to recognize when these things happen that are not allowing you to create space or pauses, whether it's in the moment, whether it's short term or long term in your career, then you need to take account of that and kind of reverse engineer what's causing it. And yes, a lot of it is like childhood ingrained in us and traumas and all of that. But if we start to recognize that as a first step, we are going to make progression.
Like so many of my discussions on this show, I wish they could go on forever, but we can't. People lead busy lives and we have to wrap things up. I want to get to the what's your work fit question. Now, normally when I have a guest on, it's their first time on the show, but Briar was on in late January, and we're going to go right to what she said was her work fit. Here we go. I want to ask you, what is your work fit? What attribute, condition, experience, place, or state of mind makes work a part of your day, doing many meaningful things and not just your day? What are your thoughts?
I would say this is, so at Career Organic in particular, I run a parent-friendly environment for my entire team. And so parent could be, you could be a fur baby, you could be any type of baby, okay? I love coming to work and, seeing Slack open up and, we take pictures of where we are or our sunrise, and you get to feel connected even in a remote environment. But I also love when I get to see a message like, hey, dentist appointment with the kids today, and, be back in an hour. I love that flexibility because I'm a mom. I have two kids. I homeschool on top of everything else that I do. And I love that I get to do that. I love that I have those moments of, kids running around. I love even when I'm on a phone call with a team member and, some child comes running across the screen or a cat tail is like flicking up. It makes it real. I want to work with humans. I don't want to work with automations and technology. I want that interaction and that connection, and I want others to have that where I'm working as well, not just me.
So you don't like AI.
I like automation for what it does for productivity. So like
Yeah.
I'm not against technology, but I'm a connection person. Like I like having phone calls. Like I actually like getting on the phone and having voice to voice. Not everything has to be digital. So I think that's my emphasis there. But it's funny to listen to that now. And it's like this week we were all sharing our sunrises and our sunsets, like as a
Oh,
like
I'm glad you brought.
literally I have like 80 pictures in my Slack channel
I'm
from this.
glad you brought that up because I shot this on August the 30th. No filter. This is on
Oh,
this is
that's
on my
beautiful.
iPhone. Now you're down in Atlanta, so you had cloudy skies, but this is the outer bands of Hurricane Idalia at sunset.
Wow.
Look at this.
That's a crazy sky. It's beautiful. Well, did
So
you see my post just what was it? Yesterday?
I
Yeah, I was
I did. It
promoting,
was absolutely
you know,
gorgeous.
that's from my back deck.
Wow.
So I live in the mountains in Georgia, so I'm above the Atlanta market now.
Okay.
But it's very peaceful. But like I have people on the team that like live in California. I have someone who lives in Colombia, South America. So we get to see all this awesome scenery. But we get to know each other, and we get to be human together. And that's still my work fit. I still wanna like all the things going on. Like I've actually joined two boards this
Wonderful.
year. So I have like even more going on than I did in January. And I have to be connected. I have to have those conversations and feel like I'm participating in the growth of others.
God, I love that. Briar Dougherty, thank you so much for being on the show. Before we leave, where can our viewers and listeners find you on social media so that they can read up on your thought leadership, but perhaps more importantly, to connect up with you?
Yeah, well, I love connecting, as I just said. So LinkedIn is probably my favorite platform.
Mine too.
I believe I'm the only Briar Dougherty on LinkedIn as of right now. So if you search my name, I should be the first to pop up.
Yeah.
Feel free to message me there, DM me. If you look through my about section, believe I have, like to schedule a phone call, to email me directly. I do love getting messages and really being able to support people. Our website is a great resource. It's careerorganic.com. We have some free resources. We have a job search support program now that's live. That it's daily support live with coaches and in a community format. And so there's a ton on there. And then our social channels are both with my name as well as Career Organic across all of them: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. And we have a free community on LinkedIn as well. So tons of opportunity to connect.
Connect with Briar. It'll be the best thing you do all day. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.